Hello, welcome. I'm Jane. My friend Donna Fletcher Crow tells me that many of you have said you enjoyed my reminiscences of our family times in Portsmouth, for which I thank you. I must say that I'm quite astonished at the interest there seems to be in my very quiet earthly life and in all of my family. Of course, I am extremely gratified that you enjoy my family, as I found them entirely satisfactory myself. And I admit to being overjoyed to learn that my books are so well thought of. They were my own true darlings, you know. At the time, I found great amusement in keeping track of the responses of friends to their publication, especially before my brother Henry, in an outburst of brotherly pride, let it be known who the lady authoress of Pride and Prejudice was. But never mind. Henry's charm was such that one simply could not remain displeased with him for long. I do digress, however. Donna tells me that although your troubles with the coronavirus seem to be lessening, most borders between countries remain closed so that travelers cannot pass freely. A real disappointment to many since your summer holidays are approaching. I can quite imagine the disappointment of having one's holiday plans interrupted. As a matter of fact, I did imagine it in several of my books, such as Catherine Morland being driven out of Northanger Abbey without the consideration of even decent civility, or Elizabeth Bennet receiving disastrous family news while touring the north of England with her aunt and uncle, and Mr. Parker's carriage upset that thrust him upon the Haywood family. Although I never ventured beyond the borders of my dear England, I certainly had many pleasant holidays whilst on earth. Some, I might say, almost a foretaste of paradise. Perhaps if I tell you something of the delights I enjoyed in my own country, it will help you find solace in keeping your own holidays nearer to home. My own special favorite memories are of the time I spent in Lyme. I'm told you call it Lyme Regis today. We, however, simply called it Lyme, although the town did receive its first royal charter, allowing it to claim the title Regis in the 13th century. The usage, though, had fallen out of fashion by my time. Now, if you will stay with me for just a moment, I believe the word is telecommute, to show you there. My, what amazing things you do get up to in your own time. And here we are in Lyme. The town was part of a general seashore development that burgeoned during my lifetime on Earth. It was due to a craze for healthful sea bathing. A great many visionary developers were working all along the south coast of England to create fashionable resorts. Thomas Hollis was just such a man for Lyme. His home was nearby, and he bought up rundown property, which he then demolished and rebuilt with improved views of the sea. His vision included a promenade and assembly rooms, which weren't completed until after his death. Perhaps those of you who have read the beginning of the story, you seem to call Sanditon, but which I had considered calling the brothers, will recall that the enterprising Lady Denham's first husband was named Hollis. Yes, I did have great fun naming my characters. I do feel, though, that I must apologize for coming on up to paradise before finishing that story. But alas, As I explained to my niece Fanny in a letter a few days after I set that particular manuscript aside, sickness is a dangerous indulgence at my time of life. And so it proved to be. But getting on, approaching Lyme in a carriage was always something of an adventure, as it was built on the steep side of a precipitously steep hill. As I describe it in my book, Persuasion, it involved descending the long hill into Lyme and entering upon the still steeper street of the town itself. Indeed, the road was so perpendicular that until the first coach road was completed in 1759, Lyme couldn't be entered by a wheeled vehicle at all, as my characters in Persuasion saw when approaching Lyme. The remarkable situation of the town gave the impression of the principal street almost hurrying into the water. My family vacationed in Lyme twice, first in 1803 and then again the next year. On our second visit, my mother and father, my sister Cassandra and myself, and our brother Henry with his wife Eliza stayed at number 1 Pine Place at the end of Broad Street. It was very near the beach, as the side of the house fronted the seashore, and some of the rooms offered wonderful views of the sea and the Cobb. I understand it is possible for visitors still to stay there today. Indeed, my friend Donna mentioned to me that she did so and found the stone entranceway much as I knew it. Later that September, Cassandra moved on to Weymouth with Henry's family. My parents and I chose to stay on in Lyme, though, albeit in less expensive quarters on the hillside above the Cobb, very near to what I understand is now a Jane Austen Memorial Garden. Truly, wonders never cease. That lodging was a long, rambling white cottage, queer and ramshackle, with low rooms and small windows, and a staircase so narrow and steep and twisted and withal dark that it was a source of danger to get up and down it. There were 2 ground floors, one in its proper place, containing kitchen, entrance, and a dining room, and the other at the top of the house, containing the bedrooms and a back door which opened on to the green hill behind. I wrote to Cassandra, "We are quite settled in our lodgings, and everything goes on in the usual order. The servants behave very well and make no difficulties, though nothing certainly can exceed the inconvenience of the offices, except the general dirtiness of the house and furniture and all its inhabitants. The weather, though, was just what we could wish, which means it was dry." I took over Cassandra's usual job of overseeing the housekeeping, including keeping an eye out to detect dirt in the water decanter, and giving the cook, who was having trouble with her stomach, a cathartic. When my party in Persuasion visited Lyme, they first secured lodging at an inn in town. Now, there were 2 inns in Lyme for them to choose from. I am delighted to learn that the Lion Inn is still offering accommodation in Lyme, although it is renamed Royal Lion and is confusingly now situated on the opposite side of Broad Street from where it was in my day. Sadly, the other inn, the 3 Cups, is now closed and boarded up, although my companion in paradise, G.K. Chesterton, much loved it when he stayed in Lyme. To return to the Persuasion party, however, immediately after ordering dinner at the inn, Anne Elliot, Captain Wentworth, and Sister Mary and her husband Charles, and his sisters Louisa and Henrietta Musgrove, all agreed that their next goal was unquestionably to walk directly down to the sea. They were come too late in the year for any amusement or variety which Lyme as a public place might offer. It was November, and the assembly rooms were shut up, the lodgers almost all gone. Scarcely any family but of the residents left. But let me read to you as I wrote it. The Cobb itself, its old wonders and new improvements, with the very beautiful line of cliffs stretching out to the east of the town, are what the stranger's eye will seek. The party from Uppercross, passing down by the now deserted and melancholy-looking rooms, and still descending, soon found themselves on the seashore, and lingering only as all must linger and gaze on a first return to the sea who ever deserved to look on it at all, they proceeded towards the Cobb. It was equally their object in itself and on Captain Wentworth's account, for in a small house near the foot of an old pier of unknown date were the Harvilles settled. Captain Wentworth turned in to call on his friend. The others walked on, and he was to join them on the Cobb. Truly, walking on the Cobb on a fine day with a high breeze is an experience difficult to match anywhere else. I did it frequently in my visits, and reported to Cassandra that I and a visiting guest walked together for an hour on the Cobb. As for the Uppercross party, Captain Wentworth, Captain and Mrs. Harville, and their friend Captain Benwick soon joined them, and they were all returned to Harville's cottage. The cottage I used as a model for Harville's abode still stands, although enormously altered to serve as a seaside cafe with an interesting name. But to return to my story, on quitting the Cobb, they all went indoors with their new friends and found rooms so small as none but those who invite from the heart could think capable of accommodating so many. Anne had a moment's astonishment on the subject herself, but it was soon lost in the pleasanter feelings which sprang from the sight of all the ingenious contrivances and nice arrangements of Captain Harville to turn the actual space to the best account, to supply the deficiencies of lodging-house furniture, and defend the windows and doors against the winter storms to be expected. Soon the visitors went back to their inn to dress and dine. But Captain Harville had promised them a visit in the evening, and he came, bringing his friend also. The party enjoyed a comfortable coze in the inn sitting room. The next morning, Anne and Henrietta found themselves the first of the party to rise, so agreed to stroll down to the sea before breakfast. They went to the sands to watch the flowing of the tide, which a fine southeasterly breeze was bringing in with all the grandeur which so flat a shore admitted. They praised the morning, gloried in the sea, sympathized in the delight of the fresh-feeling breeze, and were silent. Until Henrietta suddenly began again with, "Oh, yes, I am quite convinced that with very few exceptions, the sea air always does good. And so I really think," and continued to ramble on for a considerable period until finally all subjects suddenly ceased on seeing Louisa and Captain Wentworth coming towards them. They came also for a stroll till breakfast was likely to be ready. But Louisa, recollecting immediately afterwards that she had something to procure at a shop, invited them all to go back with her into the town. They were all at her disposal. When they came to the steps leading upwards from the beach, a gentleman at the same moment preparing to come down politely drew back and stopped to give them way. The errand was accomplished and breakfast over, when they were joined by Captain and Mrs. Harville and Captain Benwick, with whom they had appointed to take their last walk around Lyme. They were about to bid farewell to the Harvilles at the door of their cottage when, as they drew near the Cobb, there was such a general wish to walk along it once more. All were so inclined, and Louisa soon grew so determined that the difference of a quarter of an hour, it was found, would be no difference at all. There was too much wind to make the high part of the new Cobb pleasant for the ladies, and they agreed to get down the steps to the lower. And all were contented to pass quietly and carefully down the steep flight, excepting Louisa. She must be jumped down them by Captain Wentworth. In all their walks, he had to jump her from all the stiles. The sensation was delightful to her. The hardness of the pavement for her feet made him less willing upon the present occasion. He did it, however. She was safely down, and then instantly, to show her enjoyment, ran up the steps to be jumped down again. He advised her against it, thought the jar too great, but no, he reasoned and talked in vain. She smiled and said, "I am determined. I will." He put out his hands, but she was too precipitate by half a second. She fell onto the lower pavement of the Cobb and was taken up lifeless. There was no wound, no blood, no visible bruise, but her eyes were closed. She breathed not. Her face was like death. The horror of the moment to all who stood around. And at that point, I shall leave the upper cross party and turn to a less alarming subject. Assemblies were held there every Wednesday and Thursday evening. Although built on a very cramped site, the assembly rooms were said to be modeled on those at Bath. Sadly, it seems that the site at the foot of Broad Street is now used as something that I am told you call a car park. Although I must say, it doesn't look much like a park to me. You may trust me that it was considered quite an elegant accommodation in my day. It was a large two-story ballroom with 3 chandeliers and an orchestra of 3 violins and violoncello. I especially remember one evening I described to Cassandra as pleasant but not full. I danced with Mr. Crawford, and had I chosen to stay longer, might have danced with Mr. Granville, or with a new, odd-looking man who had been eyeing me for some time, and at last, without any introduction, asked me if I meant to dance again. I think he must be Irish by his ease, and because I imagine him belonging to some bold, queer-looking people, just fit to be quality at Lyme. There were also card and billiard rooms, where, as I reported to Cassandra, my mother had her pool of commerce each night. Our father preferred reading the newspapers, as London and county papers were available, as well as tea and coffee for 1 shilling per person. Sedan chairs were available for the more fashionable patrons. But my mother and I walked home by the light of the moon. As our father stayed on somewhat later, our servant James accompanied us with a lantern, but the moonlight was sufficient for it to remain unlit. Today, the seafront around the curving beach between Lyme and the Cobb is a paved promenade called Marine Parade, much of it lined with colorful cabanas. In my day, the walk was referred to simply as the walk and amounted to little more than a footpath across the sand. I often took the walk on my way to bathe. Lyme offered 4 bathing machines, and I made good use of them. On one particularly enjoyable morning in September, I found the bathing so delightful, and Molly, my dipper, so pressed me to enjoy myself that, as I confessed to Cassandra, I believe I stayed in rather too long, as since the middle of the day I have felt unreasonably tired. I shall be more careful another time and shall not bathe tomorrow, as I had before intended. The key to Lyme's burgeoning fortunes as a seaside resort was that Sir Henry Halford, royal physician, analyzed Lyme's seawater and declared it to contain a greater number of saline particles in a given measure than any other. Men bathed as nature intended, but women more modestly wore shifts. A bell rang for men to leave the beach so women could bathe. A regulation that came in shortly after my time declared that men's and women's bathing machines must be at least 50 yards apart. Gentlemen were forbidden to row boats within 100 yards of ladies' machines. Unfortunately, it seems that one of my favorite enterprises when visiting Lyme is no longer available to visitors. That is, walking over the cliffs to Charmouth. I once described myself in a letter to Cassandra as a desperate walker, and I took the cliff walk to Charmouth several times. Henry recounted later with pleasing affection the rambles we took together last summer. As I wrote in Persuasion, a very strange stranger it must be who does not see the charms in the immediate environs of Lyme to make him wish to know it better. The scenes in its neighborhood include Charmouth with its high grounds and extensive sweeps of country, and still more its sweet retired bay, backed by dark cliffs, where fragments of low rock among the sands make it the happiest spot for watching the flow of the tide and for sitting in unwearied contemplation. I was much aware of the fragility of the soil in the area, as I described in Persuasion. The green chasms between romantic rocks, where the scattered forest trees and orchard of luxuriant growth declare that many a generation must have passed away since the first partial falling of the cliff prepared the ground for such a state. Sadly, it seems that recent landslips have now made the path unpassable. But one more Lyme site I must share with you before I haste back to paradise is St. Michael's Church in Church Street. My clergyman father saw to it that we never failed in our daily morning and evening prayers, whether at home or away, and likewise never failed in the importance of regular worship twice on Sunday. If we were unable to attend church due to inclement weather or illness, we had the Psalms and lessons and a sermon at home. It was fortunate, however, that at Lyme, a convenient church had stood on this spot since Saxon times. I do thank you for joining me in my reminiscences. Even in the bliss of paradise, it is a joy to recall the pleasures earth had to offer. I suppose my clergyman family would call such delights a foretaste. And so allow me to urge you to partake thoroughly and to bid you farewell. But before my next visit, if you would like to know more about my favorite places on earth, allow me to recommend Donna Fletcher Crow's books that take the reader to my homes and to the places I knew in London. Although I must say, I never had any of the encounters with murderers that her Elizabeth and Richard seemed to do. But for now, adieu.